One of the arguments by those fans of Star Trek that dislike what they've termed New Trek is in regards to how Starfleet and the United Federation of Planets are portrayed as shady organizations, when Old Trek never did. But is that argument true? Well, today we find out. Hello and welcome to Truth or Myth, a Star Trek web series that looks at the truth, or canon information, to dispel any myths that have surfaced on any given topic. In today's episode, we're taking a deep dive into Star Trek to see if some fans' claims about Starfleet and the UFP not being shady in Old Trek are true, and therefore validate that aspect of their opinion when it comes to New Trek. I hope you enjoy. Recently on this channel, I've been making videos dissecting the arguments given by the small chunk of vocal fandom that are against Star Trek's recent iterations. This channel has always been dedicated to the truth of any situation, whether I agree with that truth or not. And let me tell you now, there are some people who simply cannot handle the truth. Both the comment sections on my two previous videos in this series had those individuals who tried to blindly argue against the facts presented in those videos, or change the topic of whatever those videos were about to something else. My first video was on violence in Star Trek, and proved violence was always there, just simply in a form which was permitted by the censors and television standards of the time. Well, the second video was about Star Trek's inconsistencies, which again proved that Star Trek always had them. These two videos were about those specific arguments, and by presentation of proof made those arguments invalid. And so now we come to a third argument, which is, was Starfleet and the United Federation of Planets always a shady organization? Or was this concept merely created for Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard? So, to find out, let's head back to Star Trek's beginning as a franchise and look at the original series of the show, to see if there's anything within those episodes that could prove these two organizations weren't and aren't as spotless as some fans like to think they are. I think in order to begin at the right spot for this deep dive, we should talk about the Prime Directive. It is Starfleet's General Order 1, its law, that the UFP created sometime during or after the forming of the Federation. We know from the episode The Omega Glory that the Prime Directive is an absolute law. Kirk tells us in his log entry that a starship captain, their crew, and the starship itself are expendable when it comes to obeying the Prime Directive. So why then are there so many episodes that just seem to ignore this law? Take the episode Errand of Mercy. Here Starfleet once again might be going to war with the Klingon Empire, and in order to get a leg up on these nasty bad guys, the Prime Directive is thrown out the airlock, when Kirk is ordered to Organia to convince its simple, not capable of warp travel species to join as allies with the Federation against the Klingon foes. Or how about the episode A Taste of Armageddon, where Starfleet sends the Enterprise with an ambassador to Aminiar 7 in order to begin peaceful relations with that culture. Now, it certainly seems like the Aminians have some sort of knowledge of other spacefaring cultures, as they warn the Enterprise to stay out of their space. Yet this ambassador, representing the Federation, simply orders Kirk to ignore that communication and head into another world's sovereign space. Shouldn't that be considered by Kirk and company as an illegal order, and thus invalid? But instead, Kirk and crew head to the planet, and when it's discovered that Aminiar and its neighboring planet Vendikar are in a computer-controlled war, Kirk takes it upon himself to end that war. Now, you can sympathize with Kirk all you want in this situation, but the reality is quite simple. There are two planets that are involved in their own clearly internal matter, and thus are protected by the Prime Directive's non-interference clause. Isn't stopping a war so the Federation can have peaceful contact with said societies constitute interference? And yet, Kirk wasn't prosecuted for the violation. Why? Because Starfleet ordered him there, and the ambassador sent with the Enterprise, who represented Starfleet's intentions, permitted this act to occur by giving his own orders to Kirk. As we all know, Kirk and the Prime Directive have a very interesting relationship indeed. He seems to violate the PD every other week, and everyone is okay with it. But why? Well, because what he did was morally correct, or in the best interest of Starfleet and the Federation. But laws simply don't work that way. Laws are not suggestions that a person can choose to follow or not follow when it suits them. And what does it say about a government who don't follow their own laws? Look at the episode The Enterprise Incident. In that episode, in order for Starfleet to once again get a leg up, this time against the Romulan Star Empire, they order Kirk and Spock to lie, cross the neutral zone, and steal a piece of technology, the cloaking device from the Romulans. So shady is Starfleet that they even make Kirk and Spock swear not to only destroy the Enterprise if the plan goes sideways, but to lie in order to protect Starfleet's good name. That's pretty shady in itself, really. But the original series isn't the only series with these types of problems. Take Star Trek The Next Generation, for example. Remember that time Admiral Mark Jameson was ordered out of retirement in order to conduct negotiations to rescue hostages? Well, Jameson was a horrible admiral. During this episode, we find out that he definitely violated the Prime Directive by giving Federation weapons to both sides of the conflict on this planet. Because of his direct actions, millions died. But does Starfleet do anything about that? Like court-martial Jameson into oblivion? No. Instead, they eventually promote him to Admiral, and he serves a lifetime in Starfleet. Now, it may be possible that Jameson lied to command about the whole incident, but someone had to have known about his lies. After all, how does Jameson beam down so many weapons to both sides without someone else knowing or helping? But even if Starfleet was fooled, when the truth of what he did came out, why didn't Picard place him under arrest? I mean, Picard knew he violated the Prime Directive, and yet Jameson remains in command of the mission. Even if you think that only Jameson could resolve this crisis, shouldn't Picard have said, "Okay, you're under arrest, but I'll let you finish this mission, but now I'm in charge of it to prevent any further violations"? I mean, Jameson is essentially a war criminal. A similar problem exists with Admiral Pressman from the episode The Pegasus. Here, Starfleet, against the Treaty of Algernon, develop a phase cloaking device. The big difference in this episode, though, is that we find out that the crew of the USS Pegasus mutinied when they discovered the illegal activities going on aboard the ship. After a fierce phaser fight, Pressman and a young Riker, along with 7 others, escape the starship before it's presumed lost for all eternity. Now, mutinies on a starship aren't common, and you better believe that there would be an inquiry into the whole matter by Starfleet, since we know from The Measure of a Man that is standard Starfleet procedure after the loss of any starship. So the question here is, how did Pressman get away with this? And the only answer can be that Starfleet allowed him to. In other words, to protect their image once again, Starfleet covered up the incident and no one was the wiser. Does that sound like an upstanding organization to you? This type of behavior by the highest representations of Starfleet and the Federation continues all throughout TNG and Deep Space Nine. In The Pale Moonlight, for example, Starfleet approves a plan put forth by Benjamin Sisko to trick the Romulan Star Empire into their war with the Dominion. Why? Because Starfleet wasn't winning it. Or remember Admiral Layton from the 2-parters Homefront and Paradise Lost? Starfleet was willing to overthrow the legitimately elected Federation government in order to have things done their way, as Layton and his cohorts felt the Federation wasn't doing enough to protect its citizens. Shady, right? Or how about the introduction of Section 31, an organization which, by its own definition, exists in secret to do whatever it takes to keep the Federation a utopian society? The problem here is that Starfleet knows all about Section 31, but allows them to continue once again because it benefits them. If I was an organization as dedicated to the fundamentals as some fans believe Starfleet and the UFP are, then finding out about this secret organization would be something I detest and want to root out immediately. But instead, no. Starfleet merely continues on its way and covers up the whole matter. Star Trek Voyager isn't exempt from this bad behavior either. Janeway constantly violates the Prime Directive during her entire journey. Not only in getting Voyager stranded in the Delta Quadrant in the first place, by involving the ship in a clearly internal matter, but she's constantly violating the sovereign space of other governments, stealing other people's technology or giving away Starfleet tech, and she flat out murders a sentient life form, Tuvix, and then almost murders an Equinox crew member in Voyager's cargo bay simply because she's angry. So what does Starfleet do when Voyager finally does get home? They promote her to Admiral, as though she's an example that all Starfleet officers should follow. Now, there are many other examples all throughout old Trek of this type of deception and abhorrent behavior. Behavior which not only contradicts the image that Star Trek puts forward about Starfleet and the United Federation of Planets, but also contradicts the arguments put forth by the haters of New Trek that Starfleet and the UFP are both upstanding organizations that we should aspire to, and that New Trek simply isn't following old Trek's examples in that regards. But the truth is, they are following it. In fact, they're following it to the letter. You have episodes like Ensign Ro, which has Admiral Kennelly teaming up in a conspiracy with the Cardassians. Or how about the episode The Drumhead, where Admiral Noura Sati is willing to throw the entire Federation into turmoil and destroy loyal Starfleet officers simply to have her name be important once again? How about Deep Space Nine's episode Rapture, where Sisko clearly violates the Prime Directive by telling the Bajorans not to enter the Federation at that time? Here, that violation pretty much gets brushed off because Starfleet doesn't want to annoy the Bajorans and they want to keep control of the wormhole. Or what about Starfleet's tendency to claim ownership over everything they see, like Data in The Measure of a Man, or the crashed Dominion starship in the Deep Space Nine episode The Ship? Because the Finders Keepers law isn't shady at all, right? Or the episode for the Uniform, where Sisko poisons a planet's atmosphere, and again Starfleet turns a blind eye. Why? Because Sisko captured Eddington, a situation great for Starfleet. And I could go on and on, but again I think you see the point. You can hate whatever Star Trek series you want, but what you can't do is make up facts in order to support that argument. I know some people will watch this video and be outraged that I could even suggest that Starfleet and the United Federation of Planets were ever shady, or they'll try to divert the argument into something else rather than being forced to discuss the topic of this video. Some will even attempt to attack me personally or say I'm being rude or mean simply because they don't want to face these facts. They'll make up explanations and justifications to make themselves feel better. But the truth is always that facts don't lie. Starfleet and the UFP have always been portrayed as shady organizations. They simply were never portrayed as realistically shady organizations as they are in the new Star Trek series. The seeds were always there, my friends. Simply Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard have taken those seeds, watered them, and let them grow into a realistic portrayal of governing bodies that was always there. And for me, I commend them for adding that old Trek trope into the new Star Trek mix. Thank you for watching today's episode of Truth or Myth. What shady Starfleet or UFP behavior have you found contained in all of the Star Trek iterations? What do you think about all that I've said here? Well, leave your comments in the section below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Just a little reminder here, as these topics tend to, by their nature, be inflammatory, this channel is a non-toxic environment for fans of all Star Trek. So you come in guns a-blazing or disrespectful about your opinions, and you'll be shown the door. YouTube has an excellent algorithm to catch those comments before they're even posted. and I'll be moderating the comments thoroughly to ensure that respectful decorum is maintained. You can have an opinion, but that doesn't give you the right to try and shove it down anyone else's throat. Want to help the channel remain upstanding and dedicated to the truth? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.